So firstly, we will understand the meaning of industrial relation. The term industrial relations comprises of two terms, industry and relations. Industry refers to any productive activity in which an individual or a group of individuals is engaged. By relations, we mean the relationships that exist within the industry between the employer and his workmen. Industrial relations is used to denote the collective relationships between management and the workers. Traditionally, the term industrial relations is used to cover such aspects of industrial life as trade, unionism, collective bargaining, workers' participation in management, discipline and grievance handling, industrial disputes, and interpretation of labor laws and rules and code of conduct. In the words of Lester, industrial relations involve attempts at arriving at solutions between the conflicting objectives and values, between the profit motive and social gain, between discipline and freedom, between authority and industrial democracy, between bargaining and cooperation, and between conflicting interests of the individual, the group, and the community. Various terms, or can say the parties around which the whole concept revolves, are industry, employer, employee, employment, and labor market. Industry refers to the production of an economic good, either material or service, within an economy. There are four key industrial economic sectors. The primary sector, largely raw material extraction industries such as mining and farming. The secondary sector, involving refining, construction, and manufacturing. The tertiary sector, which deals with services such as law and medicine and distribution of manufactured goods. And the quaternary sector, a relatively new type of knowledge industry focusing on technological research, design, and development such as computer programming and biochemistry. Employer can be defined as the legal entity that controls and directs a servant or worker under an express or implied contract of employment and pays him or her salary or wages in compensation. Employee is the person who is hired to provide services to a company on a regular basis in exchange for compensation, and who does not provide these services as a part of an independent business. Employee, as per Employee State Insurance Act 1948, is any person employed for wages in or in connection with work of a factory or establishment to which the Act applies. Employment is a contract between two parties, one being the employer and the other being the employee. It is a contract in which a person in the service of another under any contract of hire, express or implied, oral or written, where the employer has the power or right to control and direct the employee in the material details of how the work is to be performed. And the last one is the labor market, which means the market in which workers compete for jobs and employers compete for workers. It acts as the external source from which organizations attract employees. These markets occur because different conditions characterize different geographical areas, industries, occupations, and professions at any given time. After studying this lesson, you will be able to understand the concept of industrial relations, underline the role of three actors in industrial relations, analyze the scope, importance, objectives, and challenges of industrial relations, discuss the three perspectives of industrial relations, trace the evolution of industrial relations in India. Now the turn comes for discussing industrial relation system. An industrial relation system consists of the whole gamut of relationships between employees and employers which are managed by the means of conflict and cooperation. A sound industrial relation system is one in which relationships between management and employees on the one hand and between them and the state on the other are more harmonious and cooperative than conflict, and creates an environment conducive to economic efficiency and the motivation, productivity, and development of the employee, and generates employee loyalty and mutual trust. The three parties involved in it are employers who have the right to hire and fire them. Employees seek to improve the terms and conditions of their employment. Workers generally unite to form unions against the management and get support from these unions. And lastly, the central and state government influences and regulates industrial relations through laws, rules, agreements, awards of court, and the like. It also includes third parties and labor and tribunal courts. Now we can understand scope of industrial relation. Industrial relations are relations between employee and employer in their day-to-day work. Hence, it is a continuous relationship. The scope of industrial relations include relationship among employee, between employees and their superiors or managers. Collective relations between trade union and management. It is called union-management relations. Collective relations among trade unions, employee associations, and government. It has been remarked that the industrial relations has to attain the maximum individual development, desirable working relationships between management and employees, and effective molding of human resources. They have also arrested that either industrial relations or personal administration is primarily concerned with all functions of industrial relations seems to be very wide. It includes the establishment and maintenance of good personal relations in the industry, ensuring manpower development, establishing a closer connect between persons connected with the industry and that between the management and the workers, creating a sense of belongingness in the minds of management, creating a mutual affection, responsibility, and regard for each other, stimulating production as well as industrial and economic development, establishing a good industrial climate and peace, and ultimately maximizing social welfare. Now let's discuss importance of industrial relation. First is uninterrupted production, which ensures continuity of production. This means continuous employment for all from managers to workers. The resources are fully utilized, resulting in the maximum possible production. Second one is reduction in industrial disputes. Because of regular checking and communication, the contact between managers and workers remain positive, and thus absences of strikes, lockouts, go-slow tactics, and grievances. Third one is high morale. Every worker feels that he is a co-owner of the gains of the industry. The employer in his turn must realize that the gains of industry are not for him alone, but they should be shared equally and generously with his workers. In other words, complete unity of thought and action is the main achievement of industrial peace. Next one is mental revolution, which means changing the mind of the person. Both the employer and employee should understand the needs of each other and respect each other. This leads to good relations which benefits them in many other ways. Good industrial relations are maintained on the basis of cooperation and recognition of each other. It will help increase production. Wastages of man, material and machines are reduced to the minimum, and thus national interest is protected. Attaining adaptability is the most popular benefit of healthy industrial relation. In this world of continuous change, there is a need to be flexible and thus frequent changes required. The good relation between employer and employee makes it easy to accept change by workers. To fully understand what industrial relation is, we should know its objectives, which are to safeguard the interest of labor and management by securing the highest level of mutual understanding and goodwill among all those sections in the industry which participate in the process of production. To avoid industrial conflict or strife and develop harmonious relations, which are an essential factor in the productivity of workers and the industrial progress of a country. To raise productivity to a higher level in an era full of employment by lessening the tendency to high turnover and frequency absenteeism. To establish and promote the growth of an industrial democracy based on labor partnerships in the sharing of profits and of managerial decisions, so that individual personality may grow its full stature for the benefit of the industry and of the country as well. To eliminate or minimize the number of strikes, lockouts and gheraos by providing reasonable wages, improved living and working conditions, and fringe benefits. To improve the economic conditions of workers in the existing state of industrial management and political government. Socialization of industries by making the state itself a major employer. Vesting of a proprietary interest of the workers in the industries in which they are employed. Now the topic is Dunlop's contribution to industrial relations. This is also known as systems theory. John Dunlop developed it in 1958. The theory attempts to provide tools of analysis for interpretation and understanding of the widest possible range of industrial relations facts and activities. The theory tries to explain why particular rules are established in a particular industrial relation system. The systems theory is divided into four interrelated components, namely actors, certain context, and ideology, a body of rules created to govern the actors at the place of work. The actors are divided into three main groups: hierarchy of management, hierarchy of non-management employees and their representatives, specialized government agencies concerned with industrial relation. Thus, it can be said that industrial relations is a social subsystem subject to three environmental constraints: the market, distribution of power in society, and technology. Dunlop's model identifies three key factors to be considered in conducting an analysis of the management-labor relationship: environmental or external economic, technological, political, legal, and social forces that impact employment relationships, characteristics and interaction of the key actors in the employment relationship, labor, management, and government, rules that are derived from these interactions that govern the employment relationship. But the theory was criticized on the basis of following grounds: overemphasis on stability of the system, not very useful when roles of actors are changing. With changing business environment, new actors such as customers and community also play important role in IR process and outcome. Does not talk about different strategic choices actors make at different levels. Cochin's model elaborates this. Ignores existence of other actors in industrial relations. More emphasis on roles than people. thus ignores behavioral aspects like human motivations and preference. Now let's discuss various perspectives of industrial relations, which are unitary perspective, pluralistic perspective, Marxist perspective. In unitarism, the organization is perceived as an integrated and harmonious system, viewed as one happy family. A core assumption of unitary approach is that management and staff and all members of the organization share the same objectives, interests, and purposes, thus working together hand in hand towards the shared mutual goals. From employee point of view, unitary approach means that working practices should be flexible. Communication between groups of staff and the company. Emphasis is on good relationships and sound terms and conditions of employment. Employee participation in workplace decisions is enabled. Employees should feel that the skills and expertise of managers support their endeavors. From the employer point of view, unitary approach means that staffing policies should try to unify effort, inspire and motivate employees. The organization's wider objectives should be properly communicated and discussed with the staff. Reward systems should be so designed. Line managers should take ownership of their team or staffing responsibilities. The personal objectives of every individual employed in the business should be discussed. After this approach, in 1964, the report of the Royal Commission on Trade Union and Employees Association, the Donovan Report, recommended pluralism as a pragmatic, effective alternative to the unitarist approach. This approach sees conflicts of interest and disagreements between managers and workers over the distribution of profits as normal and inescapable. Pluralism assumes that achievement of consensus and long-term stability in management of worker relations is the best way to balance the demands of competing groups. Mechanisms and channels must be designed and introduced so that the frustration and anger associated with conflict can be vented and given relief rather than harmfully repressed. Management should thus adopt policies and agree to procedures and codes which recognize the conflicting interests exist. They should be willing to negotiate compromises. On the other hand, Marxism is a tightly argued political economic viewpoint or philosophy that seeks to explain all aspects of work and society. As a paradigm, from the start, powerful assumptions are made which then tend to be completely accepted to the exclusion of any other equally valid viewpoint. Marx argued that weakness and contradiction inherent in the capitalist system would result in revolution and the ascendancy of socialism over capitalism. Capitalism would foster monopolies. Wages would be minimized to a subsistence level. Capitalists and workers would compete in contention to win ground and establish their constant win-lose struggles would be evident. Thus, these were the three perspectives of industry. By many accounts, industrial relations today is in crisis. In academia, its traditional positions are threatened on one side by the dominance of mainstream economics and organizational behavior, and on the other by postmodernism. In policy-making circles, the industrial relations emphasizes on institutional intervention is trumped by a neoliberal emphasis on the laissez-faire promotion of free markets. In practice, labor unions are declining and fewer companies have industrial relations functions. The number of academic programs in industrial relations is therefore shrinking, and scholars are leaving the field for other areas, especially human resource management and organizational behavior. The importance of work, however, is stronger than ever, and the lessons of industrial relations remain vital. The challenge for industrial relations is to re-establish these connections with the broader academic, policy, and business worlds. The challenges being faced in industrial relations are competition on the basis of cheap labor, disinvestment, new actors and the emerging dynamics, pro-labor, pro-investor policies, declining trade union density, collective bargaining. Now let's discuss the growth of industrial relation. This can be discussed under two heads: in pre-independence era, in post-independence era. The state intervention in labor or industrial relations matter had its beginning when the British government in India was constrained to protect its commercial interests in the country. The ILO publication observes, far from protecting the interest of labor, the earlier attempts to regulate labor consisted of enactments such as the Assam Labour Act, the Workmen's Breach of Contract Act 1859, and the Employers and Workmen's Disputes Act of 1860. These acts aimed at protecting the social system against labor rather than protecting labor against the social system. The situation became unmanageable in Bombay and Bengal, hence committees were appointed to look into the matter. The beginning of the industrial relations dynamics can be traced back, as one author puts it, to the inception of the Indian Labour Conference as far back as 1942 by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, when the policy of bringing together the three parties, namely the government, management and labor, on a common platform as a consultative tripartite forum for all matters of labor policy and industrial relations was accepted. When the Second World War broke out, the Government of India passed in defense of India rules and incorporated in them Section 81A, which banned strikes and lockouts in any trade with a view of ensuring continuous supplies for the requirements of the war, provided for compulsory adjudication of industrial disputes. Then, in post-independence period, the various actions were taken in free India. This legacy was given statutory recognition when the legal provisions for regulating industrial relations were embodied in the Industrial Disputes Act. It was enacted in 1947. This act provided for the establishment of a permanent machinery for the settlement of disputes in the shape of certain authorities like Works Committee, conciliation officers, industrial tribunals, labor courts, etc. Making an award of a tribunal or any settlement brought by the conciliator binding on the parties and legally enforceable. The Act seeks the prevention and settlement of industrial disputes in all industries through conciliation, arbitration, and adjudication. The amendment made in the Act in 1976 places restraints on the employer's power to lay off, to retrench a worker, or to impose closure. Besides bringing this enactment, two major efforts made were to amend the Trade Unions Act 1926, once in 1947 and then again in 1950. In 1947, a law was enacted which defined unfair employer practices and also unfair union practices. It provided for the compulsory recognition of representative unions by employers and for the arbitration of disputes over the certification of unions as representative unions. In 1950, two bills were brought by the government, a labor relations bill and a trade unions bill. They retained the provisions of 1947 amendments. They also introduced the principle that collective bargaining would be compulsory for both employers and unions under stipulated conditions. The labor courts were empowered to certify unions as sole bargaining agents. As a reaction to the legislative approach as advocated by Jagjeevan Ram, the then Labour Minister from 1947 to 52, V.V. Giri from 1952 to 57 advocated his Giri approach in terms of voluntary negotiations and collective bargaining in a tripartite relationship. These led to better industrial situations. Now let us check if we have understood the various concepts discussed in this lesson clearly. A core assumption of unitary approach is that management and staff and all members of the organization share the same objectives. Right or wrong? Right. Workers can convince the employer to agree on their demands without any consideration of genuinity. Right or wrong? Wrong. Industry refers to the production of an economic good, either a material or a service within an economy. Right or wrong? Right. Now let's revise the whole concept. Industrial relations are the relationships between employees and employers within the organizational settings. Three main parties are directly involved in industrial relations are state, employers, and the employees. The most important benefit of industrial relations is that this ensures continuity of production. This means continuous employment for all, from managers to workers. There are three approaches to industrial relations: the unitary perspective, pluralistic perspective, and Marxist perspective. A core assumption of unitary approach is that management and staff and all members of the organization share the same objectives, interests, and purposes, thus working together hand in hand towards the shared mutual goals. In pluralism, the organization is perceived as being made up of powerful and divergent subgroups, management and trade unions. This approach sees conflicts of interest and disagreements between managers and workers over the distribution of profits as normal and inescapable. The Marxist perspective focuses on the fundamental division of interest between capital and labor and sees workplace relations against this background. The modern industrial organization is based upon two large aggregates: A. Accumulation and aggregation of large capital. B. Aggregation of large number of workers organized under trade unions. The center of industrial relations is the coming together of these two big aggregates. Used narrowly, the term industrial relations covers industrial employments only, but a wider sense, it covers public employments also.